Welcome to JS on Politics, a weekly look at politics here in the state of Wisconsin. I'm your host, Greg Borowski, and the first news I have to report is we don't have any news on the Milwaukee Lion, but if there is, we will definitely break into coverage. Instead, we're going to talk about politics, as our title might suggest. Our show lineup today, we're going to talk about the politics of crime, with Milwaukee's homicides now topping last year's total, and I'll take a look at how that plays in the political world. We'll look at more problems with Scott Walker's jobs agency and how that plays on the campaign trail. We'll look at whether the court ruling reinstating Milwaukee's residency requirement will last, and what will happen next week when the arena is back up for a vote. And we'll also look at how Scott Walker is doing on the presidential front, where he's trailing now, yes, Donald Trump. And of course, we'll include some reader questions at the end, so please send those in. But let's first start talking about crime. It's been very much in the news this week in particular. I'm joined by John Diedrich, our federal reporter and a longtime criminal justice reporter, James Causey, our editorial columnist. Talk a little bit, John, about the story that you and Ashley Lutheran wrote on Sunday about the pursuit policy and gangs on the street and how that's sort of bubbled into a bigger issue.
So what we found is that there's a new modus operandi, if you will, for gangs operating on the street, and this was laid out in court documents. What we found is that this new sort of kind of drug dealer is exploiting police pursuit rules. Essentially, these rules were put in place to protect the public from dangerous pursuits. But what's happened is drug dealers and gangs that they belong to have used those rules to essentially taunt police and drive away from them. They're in heavily tinted cars, and they know what the police rules are, and they essentially have created these rolling drug houses within their cars, moving away from houses to vehicles, and it's a very profitable business, and that in part is contributing to the homicides that we're seeing this
That's
year.
what I was wondering, because we've talked to James in the past on this show about what can be done about the violence in the city, and this may be putting a finger on what part of the problem is, if these gangs have shifted their tactics and are fighting over turf, because that turf becomes much more loosely defined because you're in your cars and not on street corners.
Well, yeah, the police are definitely going to have to change their policy, but I still don't want to see cops doing high-speed chases like Roscoe P. Coltrane, like from the Dukes of Hazzard through the city. You just can't do that.
Are we still able to talk about the Dukes of Hazzard in the politics?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right.
But honestly, I think this will require more police and citizen cooperation, because now that they're in cars with tinted windows, maybe citizens could start telling the police, well, it's that car. It's a car with this white Buick Regal with this license plate or something like that. It's going to require more police work.
Yeah, well, John, what is the challenge here? Because, you can't see in the car, which might help them establish the probable cause to chase them. And so what could be changed that might make it easier for the police officer on the street?
Well, the key for the police officer to engage, and it's not a no pursuit policy, but it's a limited pursuit policy, and they can pursue in the case of a violent felony, or if public safety is immediately at risk. What these criminals have ascertained is that if they tint their windows to the point the probable cause, the information that the officers need to conduct that chase is not available to them. So, some of the ideas that might be percolating up here is whether probable cause, as James was alluding to, could be established in different ways. The problem, though, is that these cars are so darkly tinted that even the windshield is tinted. And there was a case in court this week where the officer detailed how he came to the front of the car. He could not even see in the front of the car. That's all illegal under the ordinance. They can stop the car. The question is, how can they establish at that point that they have enough information to get in there? And that will be based on witness reports of what they've seen and so forth. The problem, though, is even then, based on 5 years of action, these individuals will not quickly stop. They've learned that if you drive 20, 30 miles an hour over the speed limit for a certain period of time, police will break contact. And what police need to figure out is how can they interrupt that practice.
Well, let's look at the politics of it and circle back there, because we have a mayor's race coming up in April. Right. Bob Donovan is certainly no fan of the pursuit policy as it exists. I don't know exactly where Joe Davis stands, but where does this become, political-wise, a problem for the mayor or the department if their policy, however whatever reason they put it in place for, that may still hold, but if it's being exploited now.
Well, Bob Donovan is not a fan of the police chief, period.
Right.
But this is very interesting. Cops do stop you anyway, even if the tint is not limousine tint. I have a small tint on my car, and I've been stopped several times by police. And I'm not a drug dealer by any stretch of the imagination. So when this becomes political, Donovan wants to play this game. He's going to really rally the troops. He's going to be talking about what we have to do and all these kind of things. I think the police chief needs to have a talk with citizens and talk with his departments and figure out a proper strategy to keep everyone safe.
Right. Well, we've talked before on the show about how often the perception of crime is driven by particular stories that feel particularly outrageous,
Right.
such as the gentleman earlier this year when he hits the toddler and there's all the shooting on the homicides. Today's story is an 82-year-old woman, John, you wrote it this morning, who was raped last week, or he says was sexually assaulted in early evening after getting off a bus and waited 3 hours for a response time. Tell us first what you reported, and then let's talk very briefly about what that impact is.
Yeah, this story is developing right now. We have police records which show that this woman, 82, she was sexually assaulted, as you said, as she got off the bus. She called police immediately. This is shortly before 5 o'clock. And the fire department came and offered medical care. She declined that because she was worried about the ambulance bill. She felt like she was going to have to pay that, as people are, worried about bills. But the police did not respond at all. And they didn't respond and after 90 minutes, they checked with a supervisor, and the supervisor said, nobody's available right now, all the squads are busy. She waited another 90 minutes, and finally she called again and said, can I take a shower? I mean, the assault was traumatic and left material behind, and she wanted to take a shower. And they said, no, don't do that, because that's very key to the case. And then, and only then, did they send a squad. So 3 hours that she waited, the department is calling that time excessive, and that they're seeing whether policy was followed or not. The mayor's office just issued a release as well, calling it excessive and saying it needs to be investigated. And this comes a year after the department itself investigated a 22-minute delay in responding to what turned out to be a fatal stabbing. So this is happening.
Just give us your take, James. So how does this play for the average city
This is
resident?
ridiculous. An 82-year-old woman was raped, and they didn't show up until she called and said, can I take a shower? That's ridiculous, and the mayor needs to speak out on this. The police chief needs to speak out on this, because this should not happen. And talk about perception. It's the worst thing that could happen to this city right now. And if the police can't ensure that they're going to keep the public safe, then what are they doing?
All right, we'll be following this story throughout the day, so check back to jsonline.com for updates. We're going to shift now to WEDC, which is the state's jobs agency, and I would say the state's troubled jobs agency, and we'll start with this video from earlier this week of Governor Walker at a news conference.
Governor, in cases where we've had a couple companies that appear to have misrepresented their own situation to the taxpayers when they ask for help, if we find that out after the fact, should our state continue to work with those people if there's a chance that they've been bad actors?
Well, again, that's part of the process and the policies we're putting in place to make sure it's not just a determination made case by case, but that there's an overall set of policies. It's part of the changes that have been made the last couple of years, particularly since 2013, and it's part of the process where it's not a one and done thing. That from a policy standpoint, every time we learn about something this board going forward, I would anticipate, even without me being on the board, but our expectation of the board, the appointees we make, is they're going to look at situations that come up along the way and make sure that we've got effective policies.
All right, we're back live, and I'm joined here in the studio by Dan Bice, our Watchdog columnist, and joined from Madison by Patrick Marley, one of our state government reporters. And I want to start with Patrick. Can you give us a sense, Patrick, of where we've talked about WEDC before, and what's the latest here where we're hearing more about problems with companies that got these loans through the state?
Sure, WEDC was created in 2011, sort of the flagship of the governor and Republican legislators as a way to make the state more nimble in job creation, but it's been plagued by problems, and we're learning more about deals that were reached in the past. The most recent ones that we've learned of or learned the details of include one where a businessman was given $1 million, even though a judge months earlier had said in other deals that he'd worked on had the earmarks of fraud. And WEDC knew about that court proceeding and still gave the money. In another case, they didn't do the adequate checks that they were supposed to be doing, and problems emerged, and then they had to sue the companies to try to get their money back.
Okay, so some of the things that have emerged now are from lawsuits where the state is seeking the money back. Do we have any reason to believe, Dan, that these things that they've put in place are being effective in terms of preventing this from occurring again?
Many of these are cases that came up early in the administration. But it is interesting. I'd written about one of these guys 15 years ago because he had done something very similar under Tommy Thompson. So it's not that this stuff is highly unusual. But the question, there are a couple of questions that have been raised by all of these stories. One is, will all of these problems reach a point where there should be some sort of investigation, not just the Legislative Audit Bureau, but an actual investigation? And it's not yet clear to me from the stories as to who was actually calling all the shots here. And actually a third question that comes to mind is it doesn't seem like the system as it existed had adequate checks on it. Right now, the head of the WEDC board is also the head of WMC, the lobby for the business community. So you have people with dual interests who are supposedly overseeing what's going on there.
Patrick, one of the changes this week was that the governor is no longer on the board. Thanks to the legislation that went through. Does that help the governor, at least from a political sense, to distance himself from these problems, or is that, how does that play going forward?
Well, that's the hope. Certainly, it allows him to prevent board meetings from becoming sort of political sideshows. That's what he said he was worried about. But it's a little bit of a blow to him. He said he wanted it, but he had put himself as the head officer for that agency, and now he's taken himself off with his state budget. It maybe tamps down the politics a little bit, but this is his creation. He's running for president now. His opponents, both within the Republican Party and the Democrats, will likely use this stuff as the months proceed.
And he's absolutely right. It's still his agency, even if he's not on the board. If there's a major problem there, people aren't going to say now, oh, well, this isn't Scott Walker's agency.
He advanced it, he promoted it.
He promoted it, he did all of that stuff. So yeah, this falls right into his lap, and he needs to figure it out. I think an investigation is needed because this is taxpayer money, and it was supposed to be money used to create jobs. So
what you see is the agency so far has been run following the sort of perspective that Walker has on government and business. That is, he's highly skeptical of government,
right,
and yet he's very supportive of business. And that's a dangerous combination when you're trying to decide what sort of money you should be giving to private corporations.
All right, we're going to shift topics now and get in another one that's in the news this morning. And Patrick, I'll start with you again on we've had the ongoing discussion from a few weeks back on the open records changes and just who was involved, and the new documents are pointing a little more directly toward Assembly Speaker Robin Vos. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so back last month as they wrapped up the budget, the Republican legislators made this move to essentially gut the open records law of the state. They backtracked 2 days later amid public outcry. And they've never told us who exactly was in charge of this and how it was put together, other than to say it was leaders working collaboratively together. The State Journal had a story last night in their print edition this morning that shows that Robin Vos was one of the ones who made a key request on some parts of that. But it remains true that Senator Fitzgerald and the governor's office were also involved in making these changes. So it was there were many cooks on this one.
Many cooks in the kitchen. All right, we'll leave that point there and talk about a couple other ones on our list here. So earlier this week, we had a court ruling on the residency requirement for the city of Milwaukee. This was something where the legislature rescinded it with saying they forbid such residency requirements. The appeals court came down in favor of the city. James, good thing, bad thing? What's your take on that?
Well, I've always been supportive of this because I think city's jobs should be for city people and city workers. If you want to be a police officer and you want to be a Milwaukee police officer, then you should live in Milwaukee. If you want to live in West Dallas, then become a West Dallas police officer. I think it's that simple. I think it keeps the middle class strong when you could keep good city jobs in the city and have people live in the city. You have a vested interest in a city when you live there.
Well, you're talking about this as if it's a policy debate. It's not a policy debate. It's a political debate.
It's a community debate as well.
But politically, what we're talking about is how the courts are going to deal with this, why the legislature's even involved instead of, allowing local control. They're involved because the Milwaukee Police Association is a powerful entity
Yes, they
that
are.
endorses Republicans and conservatives, and they want rid of this, so the Republican Party went along with it. It's the same reason they were exempted from Act 10. And so it's been overturned by the appeals court. The conservatives on the Supreme Court are more than likely going to reverse it again, and we'll end up without a residency requirement.
So, Patrick, let me ask you this, because you follow the doings at the Supreme Court. Is this another one of these short-lived victories that will sort of be reset in the other direction when the court gets it? Do you have any sense of how they'll go?
I mean, there's a very good chance of that. Certainly the city has won at the moment, but I think they know that they can't take that to the bank. This is going to be appealed. They're going to have a tough time before the state Supreme Court. Now, anything can happen. You don't know. Look at the 2 Obamacare rulings. Those didn't necessarily go the way the pundits thought. But if you're a betting person, I don't know that I'd bet on the city at this point.
Yeah, well, there is a potential problem if the city does win all the way of these. They've been letting people move out or not move in when they got jobs. So then what do you do? How do you enforce it later? Or you're going to have 2 classes of city employees, some who don't live in the city and some who do.
Well, I think you probably have to grandfather them in. That's one example of what you could do, or get them to move back and give them a certain amount of time to move back into the city.
I have a question for Patrick. He said that the Obamacare rulings didn't go exactly as they were expected. When was the last time the state Supreme Court's done something that you didn't expect? It's been a while, right?
That's it. It's been a long time. That's right.
true.
You can on the major cases. I think there are a number of cases that are lower profile that people aren't watching as closely. Don't get we don't write about as much. Where there can be some surprises, but in sort of the highest stakes cases, the most political cases, they almost always break on the lines.
Like this
or
case.
I cannot think of a recent example that did not break along.
So
the lines.
cases like this, they tend to do what you expect.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right. So if you're a city employee, maybe you should move on now because of that ruling.
Actually, I was talking to a firefighter
Yeah.
last night who sold his house and lost $40,000 on it because he
Maybe you
was
should hang on to
expected-
your house. I'm not advocating one way or the other. All right, let's talk about the arena debate, which is due up in the Assembly next week. And Patrick, your sense, is this a done deal in the Assembly just by virtue that they've scheduled the vote and are moving forward on it?
Yeah, I think that you can count on the fact that they typically do not schedule votes unless they have the votes or they're confident they can get the votes. Now, this is a unique circumstance. Republicans control both houses and never need Democrats really and don't engage with them for votes. This is the rare issue where they say they need as many as 15 Democratic votes. So Democrats have had more leverage here, as you saw in the Senate when some changes were made. It's conceivable that the Assembly is going to come back and say, we need to make some tweaks here or there. But the momentum that was built up with that 21-10 vote last week in the Senate is very positive for the Bucks, and I think the expectation is that they will get some kind of deal done. with the governor.
But any changes they make will force it to go back to the Senate, and things are dicey in the Senate. So
Yeah.
it's
So Dan, do you think
that's true? That's true. However, Senator Fitzgerald, people thought things were
Right.
dicey in the Senate before that vote, and he still got it through 21-10.
so do you think it
He said-
passes, I'm sorry, Dan, the Assembly in the same manner as the Senate, or do we need some more tweaks to sort of move the ball down the field?
Well, I think
to
that
mix
the important
metaphors?
thing is, as he said, Robin Voss is telling people privately he needs 15 Democrats. I don't know of anyone who actually believes that. I think that would mean half of the Republicans in the Assembly are going to vote against this, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's just trying to create some sort of buffer and to protect the Republicans who end up voting
Right.
for
Do you
this.
have a prediction, James? How wide of a margin is there in the end if the assumption is it's going to pass?
I think it's going to pass. I'm not going to predict how wide the margin is, but
That's
I
what
will.
we do on
but,
the
but
show.
I will.
Come on,
but
man.
I'm going to make this prediction: the Bucks make the playoffs and they win 50 games.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
way ahead of things.
Yeah, let's get that arena through the Assembly first. All right, so we're going to turn to Governor Walker on the presidential trail. Patrick, you were following him in Iowa on Sunday, and give us your sense of how he's doing there. I know you've seen him in Iowa a couple of times, I believe. So is he growing into this role as a national campaigner?
Well, he's certainly getting used to it. He's spending enough time there. He's been there a lot, and then after he announced his presidential run, it was clear that he put the most focus on Iowa. He was there for 3 days, hit 11 counties in his Winnebago. It's this thing that he's going to be going down there a lot, going to hit all 99 counties. He spent some time in his youth in a small town called Plainfield in northern Iowa. He went back there, and his third grade teacher was there. He was at the farm where a woman babysat him, and the dad in the family had been on the local city council with Scott Walker's father. So it was all really good presentation for the media. But then he got confronted by this Waukesha family with 13-year-old girl saying she was worried that her father from Mexico could be deported because of policies Scott Walker embraces. And so they had a little discussion about that in front of the media. I don't think anybody quite expected that to happen.
Yeah, well, let me ask Dan this question, because the family didn't travel there on their own. They got there with help, right? So it's sort of maybe the newest wrinkle and things that the opposition knew he wanted a great video probably, of the kid. And then so then they bring the other family over and kind of gum up.
Well, you have
Walker's
that, and then
message.
you also have trackers everywhere. And in fact, it's to the point that everybody knows, and the trackers are people from the opposition who are filming everything that's going on. And it's gotten to the point where everybody knows the other trackers actually become part of like the team of people following whatever. But yeah, it is true that Walker spent his time in Iowa, but the big news this past week has been the emergence of Donald Trump and the impact that he's having on this race. And what impact does that have on Scott Walker? Because the attention was not on what Scott Walker was doing in Iowa so much, it was how did everybody respond to the silliest thing, the recent silly things that Donald Trump has said.
I want to know if Donald Trump has Scott Walker's telephone number to give it out. But no, I think what Scott Walker needs to do is figure out a way to connect to the middle class. I mean, and that's what everyone needs to do, but he has to do it in a genuine fashion where it doesn't feel forced, it feels real. And how do you do that? How do you craft that? Yeah, of course, he met with his third grade teacher and all that stuff, and that's fine and dandy, but that doesn't connect me to middle class values and what he will do to support the middle class. He has to define that and illustrate it so people will say, okay, that's someone that I could agree with and I could support him.
Well, I mean, it's easy, I think, for people to make a light of Trump and say, well, it's just a temporary thing. I mean, the Milwaukee Lion could get to double digits in the polls with a little effort. But is this a serious problem for the governor or the others? That
I think it's good. I think it's good and bad for him. One, I mean, it's interesting because Donald Trump in the latest poll was up 24 to 13 for Walker, 12 for Jeb Bush.
How much do you believe that, though? Do you really believe he's up
But
there?
I think what's believable is that 50 to 60% of the people polled said they would not vote for him under any circumstance. So, but the good thing for him is all of this attention on Trump means less attention and focus on Scott Walker. And he's had some problems. This WEDC stuff doesn't go national right now because of the attention there. The downside is he doesn't seem sure how to respond to Donald Trump. Most people don't, because when he made the comments about the Hispanics, Walker took his time coming to a response. He was a little faster with the McCain stuff. But the important thing to remember is Donald Trump's just not another presidential candidate in this race with Scott Walker. He's also a big time donor. He gave $10,000 to Walker last June. He maxed out on his donation. Walker's not inclined usually to rip on his big donors.
Yeah, well, Patrick, and the other factor too for Trump, it's been mentioned that if he doesn't get the Republican nod, maybe he goes independent. I mean, is he a bigger problem for Republicans that he's running as a Republican, or that he might run as an independent?
Well, I think both are bad for them. I mean, I think that the problem for the Republican Party right now is that he is increasingly being used by the opponents as sort of the definition of the Republican Party. Whenever Donald Trump says something, then the Democrats say, see, this is what the Republican Party believes. Republicans have had difficulty, particularly in presidential years, with the Hispanic community. So that's a problem for them. And I think that, Walker is, the hardline stance that he's taking on immigration is maybe not helpful to have Trump out there saying the things he's saying.
I think the thing to look for is August 6th. That's the first debate. Yeah. And Walker is, I would say, having watched all of his debates over the last 5 or 6 years, and in some cases repeatedly, he's an average debater. He's not going to surprise anybody. He tries to play it safe. But with Donald Trump, you don't know what he's going to say, so it's hard to plan for what he's going to say. So it could be something that he does okay on, but given his tendencies, I'm going to guess that it's going to be Lindsey Graham and Rick Perry who are going to be more aggressive than Scott Walker in attacking Donald Trump.
Well, James, I mean, this will be a new thing, and it's sort of the next benchmark for the governor of how he performs, side by side with 9 of the, 16 now?
Right.
18, 20, how many?
I don't know how many chairs they can put on the stage, but I mean, how do you think he's going to do when when you get to judge them right one after the other and how they answer the same questions?
Well, Dan is absolutely right. Scott Walker is not dynamic, not a dynamic speaker by any means, but maybe being average right now is good enough. Maybe you don't need to really separate yourself from the pack, but just stay close to the top. I don't know if he steps outside his box and says and really goes after Donald Trump. That would be a bad idea, in my opinion. Just stick to what you do best. Keep hammering home your ideas, and I think he'll be fine.
All right, we're going to go to some reader questions now. I'm going to start with one for Patrick. This is from someone who identified as Walker fan. As right on pointer, it says the GOP debates are starting soon. What is Walker's key to standing out and scoring points? What's your sense on that, Patrick?
Well, in the debate, I'm not sure that he needs to stand out. I agree with James that, Walker is not, he doesn't perform bad in debates. He doesn't perform great in debates. And so with 10 people on the stage and characters like Trump up there, they're going to be drawing all the attention. And in a way, that's good for Walker. He doesn't have to take too many tough questions, maybe. But it's also not going to be a moment for him to necessarily stand out.
I expect him to be cautious and calm. Those are the two things that he's going to try to accomplish.
And when people see this, they may be drawn to him based on that. The Trump circus, that's going to play out pretty soon. And then they're going to be drawn to people who they believe are closer to
I still want
them.
to see Donald Trump on the stage with him.
We'll get it at least once, right? We'll see. Okay, so This question is for Dan, and this will be kind of meta here because it's from Dan. I assume a different Dan. It says Senators.
I wanted a question, so I wrote myself one.
All right, Senators Dodds, Harris, and Larson tossing the buck back to Chris Abele with the arena bill was telling, and this is the deal with the certified debt back. It says, is that a sign of his standing within the party? And I believe they're talking about Abele here.
I think it's a sign of his standing with some other Democrats, maybe not within the party, but people who've seen all of these Republicans praising Chris Abele for his work on this and other things, and his willingness to go to the Republican leadership to try to get changes on the county board. So there's a lot of concern about him from the Milwaukee delegation in the Assembly and the Senate, but I don't think it goes much beyond there. I don't think most voters are paying attention right now to what Chris Abele is doing.
All right, we have a couple questions from readers that relate to the Bucks arena. I'm going to start with Patrick on both because they're kind of into the nitty-gritty of it. This one asks, the gist of the question, it's a pretty long one, is that with the seat licenses and naming rights and things for the new arena, it would seem that the new owners would be paying close to zero of actual money out of their pocket. And it says, is this really the best deal our lawmakers could come up with? Well, the deal isn't going to change much in that regard, but could you provide any insight on how the finances will work for the Bucks? They did hold off on the naming rights as for their own benefit rather than the arena construction costs.
Right, but the state would not have any responsibility for any cost overages of building it and wouldn't have to do the maintenance and upkeep, which has become a significant cost for the Bradley Center.
But you can tell a lot from that. The owner said, sure, we'll take the maintenance. If they were afraid that they were going to lose money on this deal, they wouldn't say that. But clearly they think the deal's a good one, and they were willing to step forward and to say that.
All right, and here's another one. This is from, I'll start with Patrick again, for Stuck in Cheese, and it's this is the reader, and it says, here's a question that I have not seen answered forthrightly, and the reason may be that it's a very, very long question. But the gist of it is that if the Bucks revert to losing form, will there be renewed pressure to move the Bucks elsewhere to a bigger, more promising market? And it sort of wonders what's the certainty that they'll stay here. And I know there's a lease agreement involved, right? They don't just get to walk in 5 years.
Right. So the Bucks have said they're going to stay if they get this deal, but that was a concern among some skeptical lawmakers that they would leave. So there's a provision that over time, if we were to build the arena and the Bucks were to immediately leave, they would be on the hook for paying the public portion back, and then the amount that they would have to pay back decreases over time. But the idea is that the public's stake in this allows or either ensures that the bucks stay or that the public gets some of its money back.
All right, and our last question, I guess I'll throw this to James so he doesn't feel left out, but this is from MKE Lion, who says, don't people know I really don't exist and that this is an effort to draw attention away from the city's crime numbers? And he adds, wait, if I don't exist, how am I typing this? So what is, this is just a big distraction, right? But, I mean, do you think, is there a lion out there?
Well, I feel sorry for the poor pit bull that got shot last night when someone said they thought they saw the lion and they shot the pit bull.
Really look like a lion.
It's a very small line.
Yeah, well, I don't know. This is crazy.
Yeah, all right, we'll be back next week when we'll have a lion or won't have a lion, but we know we'll have some politics to talk about, so see you next week.